I'm going to try to shoot some video in process, and hopefully that works out. We continue with work on this bike with the corroded front derailleur, and the bottom bracket felt a little sticky, didn't feel like it was smooth enough. So I removed the crankset, and look at the corrosion on a stainless steel spindle that Shimano uses on their cranksets. As usual, it's the non-drive side bearing that goes bad. So they're par for the course, as they say. This is always the one that seems to go bad first, and it is. Fortunate enough to have a BB in stock. I've cleaned off just this section. The rest of the crankset still needs to be cleaned. But I was very curious to see if I could get that surface corrosion off. And even though I got the surface corrosion off, it left what's called pitting corrosion behind. New bottom bracket installed, and it's important to mention that Shimano bottom brackets don't spin, you know, like 100 revolutions when you pull on it or push on it. They break in over time, but even still, they stay quite a bit like this. 4, 5, 6 revolutions, and that is a brand new bottom bracket, and you'll feel that the rest of the time that you own this bottom bracket. But it'll be super quiet, as you can tell. If you have one of these Fujis, you really, really, really need to make sure that your guide sheathing, cable guides, do not get damaged. They start here and go the length of the down tube and come out that tiny, tiny hole right there. So you really want to make sure that whoever works on your bike, or if you work on it yourself, that you do not damage these cable guides. Otherwise, you'll be trying to fish it through this tiny, tiny little hole here, which I apologize, I can't get the camera to focus. When components are new, they come with this little plastic guide, this sticker. But what I wish for you folks to practice is using your finger. Try to get a feel for what that distance of 1 to 3 millimeters feels like for you. And you could be off just a tiny bit. It's not extremely crucial, but just start to get a feel for what your finger feels like in this gap. To ensure really good shifting from your front derailleur, this support bolt should be tightened so that it makes contact with the metal insert that you will put. You'll screw that on there and move this rear portion of the cage out about 0.5 millimeter. Now you'll start to see that bolt coming out, and you will tighten that against that plate. And this is what they call a support bolt. And then you look back here and you make sure that that rear part of the cage moves over ever so slightly, just like that. And you want it to be just slightly to the right of the chainring. Just like that. And you should check to make sure that it is not going to strike the crank arm. When you move it into the big chainring, you'll have to check it again to make sure it does not hit the crank arm. Next, unscrew this, which is now a barrel adjuster on these R9100 front derailleurs. Unscrew that all the way out. Next, anchor the cable. It is my recommendation that you do not do a super tight anchoring this time, because you'll have to disengage this anchor bolt a couple of times to get the right tension on the cable, and you don't want to shred the cable and have to reroute it, especially if it's an internal type of drivetrain. So what I do now is I just put it on there, get a few dry shifts, try to get a little bit of the slack out of the cable, but it's not the full torque, the final torque that I would anchor it on. What you're looking for before you adjust what is now the barrel adjuster here is you need to make sure that this semicircle has made contact with this, and that this is touching against the actual hard part of the rear derailleur, of the front derailleur. Now, once you've done that, the next step is you need to line up this tick mark with this tick mark. So there are two tick marks here. This one is going to move and this one is stationary. And the way you do that is by adjusting this barrel adjuster here. So we start tightening this down. And now you can start to see that lever arm starting to move up. And we're just stretching it for now just to get a little bit of bite and tension on that cable. Off camera, I took the cable out, gave it tension again. Now I've got it in the top trim position. In other words, shift it to the big chainring, hit the small lever one time lightly, and you're still in the big chainring, but you are in the top trim position. And you begin to tighten down your barrel adjuster here, and you're trying to line up your two white lines as I showed in a previous clip. And you keep tightening this down until you get those two lines to line up. And you may need to disconnect and reconnect the cable again, but this one is super, super close already on the first shot. All right, so I've taken the cable tension, I've disconnected the cable, retensioned it a couple of times. So this third time should be a charm. It should actually work. All right, so this third time should be a charm. Now what we do is tighten that until we get a little bit of tension. Well, good news. I've got Jess that just popped into the store. Say hello.
Hi.
Hi. And she's going to help me do the rest of this video. So here we go. All right, so this tick mark and this tick mark should align. Keep in mind, you get it in your top trim position.
Can you show them again, George? The tick marks?
Yes. This tick mark and this tick mark.
Okay. 1,
2. So now you start screwing in this guy here, which is like a barrel adjuster on your rear derailleur, which are more, and see how it's moving? Moving, moving, moving. And once it gets actually pretty close, I mean, Shimano recommends that those two lines should line up, but I've realized on a lot of bikes that it just doesn't need it to be perfectly aligned. All right, we're tightening this down, and if you don't get perfect alignment. You can see it's moving, it's moving, it's moving, and then it's lagging just a touch. Shoot up here. So if you got your inline cable adjuster, then we're going to use this instead to get that last bit of movement on your front derailleur to line up that little line where it should be. You can see it's almost perfect now. And it's always good to have a cable inline adjuster anyway, because if you're riding, you want to be able to make an adjustment if your front derailleur or your rear derailleur is not shifting well. All right, so now we put the rear wheel back in, which we clean the cassette for the customer. Okay, when you put on a Shimano chain, the writing faces the outside of the drivetrain. So what I try to do is get my magnet to pull the chain through. Same thing as when I go up and over the cogs. Just grab the chain and pull it through. So of course, feed it through your front derailleur. Now this chain is already pre-cut because it's the chain that came off. Okay, so let me see if I can get that a little closer. You always look at these these quick links, and there's an arrow there. And so what I do to make sure I can link this back up is, instead of fighting that rear derailleur spring, which is pretty strong, I take it off of the chain rings and I just put it inside the frame just very gently, so that it doesn't, so it's not, I'm not fighting this. And then just to make things easier, it's funny because SRAM wants you to do their power locks with the drivetrain, but I just like to use these tools instead to open and close these links. So lock it back in, and then put your chain back on your small chain ring. Now we need to check the shifting. All right, so now what you want to do is you want to check your front derailleur that it shifts in all 4 positions. So you have a top position, trim position, low position, and low trim. All right, so that's what we're going to shoot while we are pedaling. So here's top position, a little bit of a trim position. So top, trim, and it's probably easier to see it moving here. Doesn't move the cage as much. So top, trim. Sorry, it dropped. Let's do this again. So top, trim, and then we drop to the inner chain ring, and then one more for trim. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the way you want to check your inner limit is you drop it there, and sorry for the noise, but you want to make sure that that doesn't rub too much. So what you'll want to do is adjust your inner limit. You'll see it moving, and shift it a few times. What you're trying to do is get that little bit of a gap in between, just a tiny gap in between the chain and the inner limit screw. So in your top trim position, even though the lines are lined up back here, you should have a little bit of a gap between your cage, the inner cage, and the chain. And we don't have that. So what we're going to do is release some of the tension so that you have a little bit of a gap. See how that gap opened up right there? All right, so top position, trim position, top position, trim position. And you should be able to see a nice little gap between the inner side of the cage and the chain. Okay, a little movie magic. We have to put a rag behind this so that the camera knows what to focus on. But what we're looking for is a gap in the big chainring setup, but not too much so it doesn't throw the chain. Now the last couple of steps, we need to get this cable inside and underneath here. So you put the front derailleur in the big chain ring so you can get it underneath there. Then drop it to the small chain ring so you can get behind here. All right, so now you need to feed this guy through here. And this right here is going to go inside that hole right there. So you drop this in there, and you want to hear a snap. There it is, snapped into place, and now it's held there. So you have to just make sure that your cable is routed inside here. Now what we're trying to do is gauge how much cable we are going to cut. So funny thing is, once a long time ago, one of the first ones that I installed, I cut the cable too short and I had to run the cable through the whole frame again. Internal, of course. Okay, so I want to cut it probably around there. So now I cut that just right, and we just want to crimp that on there so it doesn't fall off. And unfortunately, the tool I use to get in there for other type just doesn't fit in this area. So there it is, crimped on. Okay, so the last thing we have to do now is wrap the bar tape. And what I wanted to show you is that I wrap bar tape from the top down. And the reason I do that is because I do not like finishing tape. I do not like using black electrical tape. It gets all messy and the adhesive gives way at some point, and then you have to rewrap it. And some people just keep wrapping on top and on top and on top more black electrical tape. That's not my style. So just take a quick look here so you can see what I mean. So I start here, wrap it this way, and then anchor it at the bar end. And I just think this looks a lot neater this way than the way traditionally it is wrapped at all the other bike shops. Okay, now let's have some fun. So last thing before you go. This gentleman has a taillight, and he has not only a taillight, but he has blinkers.
Actual turn signals.
Actual turn signals, and he's got a light. And look at all those colors. Isn't that cool?
It's awesome.
It is awesome.
Looks like a police car.
Yeah. Safety first. So anyway, that's all. Thanks so much for sticking with me on a long video. We got an opportunity to have Jess film a little bit for me so I could get some different angles while I'm actually doing the work. So if you like this type of content, please let her know, because I can't shoot this content without her assistance.
Yeah, nominate me for an Oscar or something.
So director of photography or videography. But we need her help so that she can film me as I'm doing step-by-step maintenance procedures. I know some of you have asked for it, so that's the only way we can get it done. So show some love to Jess, and please like and subscribe. And in the meantime, we'll see you up the road.